Welcome to Talking with Sapna. Today we're going to be talking about action versus intention with children's behaviour. It's really interesting that when we look at children's behaviour, we very much look at the action that they undertake. Right? I used to see it at school all the time. The children would do something, they'd take an action, and as educators, we'd react. And the thing is that when we react to an action, inevitably we're just shutting down walls for communication. And so what we really want to be able to do with our children is we want to understand the intention and respond rather than react. This idea of responding rather than reacting is sometimes easier said than done. I know I myself still find it quite difficult. I still at times will react to an action rather than respond to the intention. But what I have learnt about the reacting versus the responding is often you will react when you're feeling a strong emotion. And often as a parent, what leads to your reaction rather than your response is an overwhelming sense of fear or anxiety. But what's really interesting about fear and anxiety when we use that as a reaction mechanism is that actually we're just putting those same emotions onto our child. And then all of a sudden your child is feeling fearful and anxious, not because that's actually how they feel, but that's because how they've seen you react to whatever action they've taken. And sometimes reaction is important. Right? When your child's safety is at risk, reaction to the action is important. When they're about to touch a hot stove or run across a road without looking, you have to react to the action they are taking because that is how they learn that that action can hurt them. And we have to react to the action. So let's just put that aside for a second because we know that. But what we want to look at is what about all the other circumstances, all the other situations, all the other actions they take in which you only see the outward action rather than looking at the inwards intention behind their behaviour. It was really interesting being in a school because you see this idea of intention behind behaviour a lot. You see children act out. I used to see it all the time, right? You'd be sitting on the floor and someone would make a joke. And it wasn't so much that they were trying to be disruptive. And often that's the perception we have, that if you're calling out on the floor, you're trying to be disruptive. And so therefore I'm going to react to your action of being disruptive by telling you off in front of the whole group. Often what I found was those children who were calling out on the floor actually just wanted to be heard. They wanted a little bit of validation from their peers and they wanted that validation from me as the educator, as the teacher in the classroom. And when you flip that, when I started responding to their needs and that intention behind this behaviour that was quite unfavourable because it was distracting the whole class and losing our train of thought, but rather than reacting to it, I would step away from the situation and outside of that group environment, I would talk to them about it. I wouldn't add fuel to the fire in the moment of them calling out on the floor because that was reacting to the action and that was actually only going to make things worse. But rather I'd pull them out and then I'd talk to them. Is there anything you want to tell me today? How are you feeling? There were certain students who I knew I needed to touch base with as soon as they walked into the classroom in the morning. Because on the days I didn't do that morning check-in, oh man, did we have some bad days, right? Their behaviour, their actions were disruptive. They weren't always being kind. And yes, it was hard. I'm not going to tell you that I never reacted because I did react. I did react. Especially when I myself was overcome with my own emotion, when there were 101 things going on in my head and I just didn't have the time or the headspace to stop. But when I walked away from the situation and reflected on it and realized that actually they're not trying to be disruptive or rude, they just need one-on-one attention at the start of the day. And you'll notice that with your children. that if they don't get that one-on-one time to connect with you at some point throughout the day, they will pull your attention towards them by doing actions that are not favorable. I'm sure you can think of at least one time in the last 24 to 48 hours where your child has done an action and you have reacted to it. Normal, happens. But if I ask you to stop and take a step back and go, well, why do you think they were calling out? Why do you think they acted that way? Why do you think they did something that you specifically asked them not to do? And then look at how much time you've just spent with them, just pure connecting. And we talk about this idea of connecting a lot, but that idea of just being present in the communication. 9 out of 10 times what you will find is that you haven't had that connecting moment. And that connecting moment doesn't have to be an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a day, or even half an hour. Sometimes that connecting moment can be 5 minutes of just pure, unfiltered, being in the present, connecting time. And when you do that, you see that, one, your child's behavior flips. They don't need to seek attention in ways that disrupt because they're getting that connection time with you. But also what happens is that you can step back from the situation and then therefore respond rather than react, because you've taken the time to slow down. And often the reason we react to an action rather than respond to an intention behind behavior is because we're moving at 100 miles per hour all the time. I've got this to do and this to do and this to do, and this whole idea of multitasking, and let's be honest, we know multitasking doesn't work. So in order to identify the intention behind your child's behavior rather than focusing on the action, you need to be able to take a step back. And to take a step back, we need to slow down. We need to allow space where we can observe. Because when you have that space to step back and observe, that's when you see intention behind behavior. Think about it in your relationships, right? Let's look at your partner or a significant person in your life. When you yourself are calm, when you have space and are not overwhelmed with your own emotions, then when they do something, when they take an action or make a comment, oftentimes you can step back from that and go, oh, they didn't mean it to come out that way. But when you yourself are overwhelmed with emotion, then what they say and the way they acted, you react to it. Oh, you're so rude, you don't appreciate me, it's not fair. It's what we all go through. I tell you, I still laugh about it. When I'm in the midst of emotion and I haven't taken the time and engaged in my self-care strategies, then someone close to me can say something which is innocent, but in my head, it's like, oh, I can't believe they said that. Is that really what they think of me? I can't believe it. And I go into a tailspin. I react. I react to the situation. I react to the action that I've perceived because of what I'm going through. And that happens with children all the time. We react to the action because of what we're going through. You notice it with children. I know I certainly have. When I look back and reflect on some of my moments in the classroom that I'm not proud of, what I see is that I reacted to actions because I myself was not engaging in self-care and time out. And I said this to you when we first started filming these videos, that I will talk to you about tips to help your children, but I will also talk to you about things you need to do for yourself. And this topic is a perfect reminder. If you want to be able to respond rather than react, to notice intention rather than focus on action when it comes to your children's behavior, then one of the first steps in doing that is for you to take a step back, engage in self-care, have your own mental space. Because when you have your own mental space, then it becomes easier to respond rather than react. Then it becomes easier to notice the intention behind your child's behavior rather than reacting to the action. So what's one self-care practice that you're going to do this week to give yourself that space? And once you've done that, see if you can notice the intention behind your child's behavior and see if you can take a deep breath and respond where you would usually react